Now, the head of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, has appealed for an end to the conflict between Israeli forces and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, which has killed hundreds on both sides. Mahamat, in a statement posted late on Saturday by the 55-member AU bloc on X, formerly known as Twitter, urged both parties to return without preconditions to the negotiating table to implement the principle of two states living side by side. He further called on the international community and the major world powers in particular to assume their responsibilities to impose peace and guarantee the rights of the two peoples. Gun battles raged into Sunday morning between Israeli forces and hundreds of Hamas fighters in multiple Israel locations, while soldiers and civilians were taken hostage. And to dwell more on the Israel-Palestine story, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned of a long and difficult war as fighting with Hamas has left hundreds dead on both sides after a surprise attack on Israel by the Palestinian militant group. The conflict's bloodiest escalation in decades saw Hamas carry out a massive rocket barrage and ground, air and sea offensive on Saturday that Israel's army said had killed more than 200 Israelis and wounded 1,000, while soldiers and civilians were taken hostage. Gaza officials said intense Israeli airstrikes on the coastal enclave had brought the Palestinian death toll to at least 256, with nearly 1,788 wounded. Joining me on the news to discuss this is our global affairs analyst, Nweke. Collins, it's nice to have you around.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, while the conflict between Israel and Palestine has been going on for years, what would you say prompted this latest escalation, which unexpectedly happened by Hamas on Saturday, which Israel swiftly retaliated to?
Simply put, Hamas is desirous to achieving freedom for its people, and actually the principle of two states living alongside one another. Now, in the past several months, running into years, the Israeli security forces have been seen to be heightening their, offensive, their operation against both Hamas and some security forces of the Palestinians under the Hamas rulership in the Gaza Strip. They have also continued to make out untold hardship to the civilian population in Gaza particularly, but of course by extension to the Palestinians. Now, if you talk to the militants of Hamas that have carried out this operation, this is exactly what they will put on the table for you as a justification for the action that they have taken. And so that was how they now decided to carry out this operation, which, as a matter of fact, and like you alluded to, came unexpectedly. The Israelis have actually experienced a very, very major, intelligence failure, considering that they were able to penetrate the Israeli, territory both by land, sea, and air, undetected. That is unseen, at least in the past 50 years.
Well, with the U.S. Pledging military assistance to Israel, do you see this spiraling out of control? Because we've also seen Hezbollah joining to support Palestine in the attack. And of course, Iran has also pledged support. As we see, it's major of the Arab countries have pledged support to Palestine, as it is, of course, looking at the onslaught going on in Israel right now. We might not be able to tell how wars like this would end, even as we know the beginning. How do you think this may pan out in terms of the losses that might accumulate if this war persists?
It is obvious that one thing that anyone can beat his or her chest and tell you in terms of predicting how this is going to pan out is the fact that it is definitely going to get worse before it gets better. That is a given. Now, when you look at, when you do a segmentation of the reactions so far, including some of the major countries that you have named, you are going to come up with, a classical three blocks of people, countries in the world. So you have, one on the extreme right and then one on the extreme left. Those supporting Israel, come what may, and the United States of America, of course, is under that, and then their Western, allies, and then you have, on the other extreme, the Arab countries, of which the Arab League is going to be meeting, sometime today, convened by Palestine. And then you have those somewhere in the middle who are neither here nor there. And I'm glad to identify, the European Union as captured in your introductory remarks that have actually positioned themselves in terms of pitching their tent somewhere in the middle. How did they do that? They did that simply by focusing on the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is that everyone has to come back to the negotiating table. And the subject of that negotiation is two states living side by side each other. That is a big deal. And whatever is holding that from happening, people have got to do that. Now, going back to the United States and their resolute support for, Israel, it is not surprising. It can be surprising to anyone because that is at the heart of the U.S. Foreign policy. But one can hope that President Biden, who had said at the beginning of his administration that, when injustice happens anywhere, those injustices have got to be tackled head on. One would expect that at the end of the day, he will use this his initial support for Israel, come what may, as a leverage, to get Israel to actually slow things down and then indeed take negotiations towards two states, living next to each other as, the ultimate place to be.
And Collins, there's a twist to it anyway, bringing the U.S. into the discourse. Former U.S. President Donald Trump accused President Joe Biden of indirectly funding the attacks, reflecting Republicans' claims that about $6 billion were released last month to Iran as part of a prisoner exchange deal, and it was used to fund the Hamas attack. What do you make of this allegation?
That's political, highly political. And anyone would know that coming from Donald Trump, whom the world definitely can't take seriously anymore, except his, hardcore supporters. He will say anything to gain attention. As a matter of fact, Biden or any other U.S. president for that matter cannot afford not to be on the side of Israel. The only ameliorating circumstance in the case of Biden is that something also tells him that the Palestinians have the right to exist, and that Israel has got to recognize that right as well. Of course, that didn't come down well with the likes of Trump and those on the extreme side of the Republican Party, and so they could say anything to justify that. But the fact remains that there are issues to resolve on both sides, and ultimately the focus is the two states solution, and everyone has got to underwrite that as the ultimate solution.
Now, Collins, I'm quite disturbed about the peace deal that has been proposed at this particular time. The same thing that the African Union has proposed, saying that there should be going back to the negotiating table without preconditions to implement the principle of two states living side by side. But then we've heard the Prime Minister of Israel, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, coming out to say that we are at war and is going to exact a price that Hamas and Palestine would heavily have to pay for, that they do not even understand the circumstance or the gravity of what they will have to pay for. So at this particular time, do you think a peace deal can be struck? Because we've also heard from other people say that when you present a peace treaty to terrorists, as the case may be, it's like showing a softer side that they will always want to exploit, to always want to keep perpetrating such heinous acts. So do you think that should come into play now?
There is no clean war anywhere. And so when Hamas decided to launch a rocket attack, that is their judgment. But of course, there is no reasonable person that you will ask that will tell you that the decision to attack Israel is the right one, because it does not de-escalate, it actually escalates the tension. And of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, like it is now doing. Now, we are going to see more casualties. That was why I prefaced my analysis by saying that if there is one thing we are sure of, and that is the fact that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So the issue of coming back to the negotiating table is nice to say. It is a very, very good thing. And it plays into what they call diplomatic ambiguity. But even those who are altering those statements know that it's going to take a while before tensions will begin to douse, and then you begin to remember where that negotiating table is. It is not now. So I think that is not even a reason not to continue to call for calm, not to continue to call for restraint, especially when it concerns civilian casualties. Because on both sides of the divide, you can see that the civilian casualties are rising, and more deaths is going to be recorded because those that are wounded and are in critical conditions are huge in numbers. And so in the end, an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. And so this has to be the message of everyone, especially the United Nations, that has called an emergency meeting today to wade into the matter. But I'm afraid, like Netanyahu said, it's going to be a long war, drawn war, except more countries get more responsible by not taking a side, because that will simply aggravate the issue.
So before I let you go, what role can the international community play at this particular point to bring about a lasting solution to the conflict? What approach, a new approach, do you think would be sensible at this point?
A new approach is difficult to project at this time, because that principle of two states living side by side each other happens to be the only thing that is workable. Now, at some point, there are signs that Israel is buying into that. At other points, it looks completely impossible, especially when you consider that Hamas has been elected as legitimate government over the past nearly 2 decades. As a matter of fact, 17 going to 18 years that they have been taught, and everyone knows where they stand, particularly being supported by Hezbollah. So you will then begin to ask yourself, what do Palestinians really want? Do they really want, lasting peace? And if they do, how come Hamas was actually elected? Now, going to the Israeli side, everyone knows where Benjamin Netanyahu stands in terms of his hardline position. And that brings me to a direct, answer to your question. Yes, he's a hardliner. He's been known to be so. And he hasn't, made any secret of the fact that left to him, he's going to wipe Palestinian out of the surface of the earth. Yet,
okay,
political negotiation brought him to become the prime minister again. So, international community, what can they do? You continue to jaw. And the UN has, the ultimate role in this Georgia exercise.
Collins Nweke, Global Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for talking to us.
Always my pleasure.